Hey Silver Soul. This is just a quick response video to um, your Gaia video. Um, like you, I've also been very interested in autopoiesis and Gaia theory, and yeah, I thought you touched on some really interesting points. And even though I am not outside today, although I should have been, um, I just wanted to, I don't know, highlight a few things that you mentioned. Um, one of the very important things that I think you talked about was the idea that our economy, if we have this ecological consciousness that is developing or emerging in society, then our economy perhaps can learn a thing or two from nature and from ecosystems, and actually begin um, to generate the vitality of which it thrives on, like a rainforest does. It bears the fruit, and that very fruit is what sustains it. And it's this whole interdependent dance that a forest or any kind of ecosystem generates spontaneously and naturally of itself. Um, it's kind of like everything, it's almost like a toolkit, because everything it needs, um, for instance, if you plant a seed, the seed uses the environment, it uses the moisture in the soil, and it uses the sunlight, and it grows, and then it creates a habitat and perhaps shade for other plants to grow under it, and a whole little ecosystem is formed. Um, in the same way, can we think of economies and production and society in this sense, in the sense that we should be bearing our own fruits in this kind of interdependent dance, this autopoetic, self-generating meaning. And I think to some degree we also have to look at the virtualization of um, society and meaning and content and creativity and information, because what we're doing with the internet, I think, um, inadvertently, because this has been a very natural process. We didn't predict it, we didn't plan it. Um, and through our directive motives, such as uh, trying to develop better software, trying to develop better hardware, profiting from that and from its efficiency, we've created, it seems like we've created a mirrored reflection of the rainforest in its seedling form in the internet, because now we have this interdependent dance where information is the new environment, and what I think what we thrive off of is information and ordering it and having spontaneous meaning from it. And examples, of course, the most superficial and artificial, but the most prominent, abundant in the internet is, viral memes and blogs and these sorts of things. So we're sort of self-generating our content, and networks within themselves are bearing fruit, just like a forest does. A forest is not, as we would think of a factory, a means to an ends. The means is the ends. And the more we begin to reflect that forest, the more we begin to reflect that natural, spontaneous, creative, uh, inherently vital system in society, the more we can sustain ourselves, I think, in this century. Because unless we really, really learn how to do this, not just with information, but with economy, with just society all the way up and all the way down, unless we can begin to reflect the forest in its spontaneous ability to generate a natural equilibrium and self-generated balance, we're going to have a lot of trouble, because the more we think of society as a machine or a mechanism to some kind of ultimate end or some kind of ultimate production, we separate the two unnaturally. We make it artificial. But societies don't have to be artificial. Societies can be as organic as the forests they grow in. they emerge from. So our time away from this sort of Taoist mentality, this autopoetic, this Gaia mentality, our time away from that, I think hopefully will be the lesson learned, and we'll understand at least a little bit better how to function within, I don't know, the natural environment. So you mentioned Wilbur, and you mentioned a couple of other thinkers. The whole vertical and horizontal thing. I guess I've been trying to think. Oh, am I thinking vertically and horizontally? Is that how I pictured it? I didn't really think of it like that. I just sort of thought the horizontal, the rhizomatic dimension to ecosystems is what is self-sustaining. And the vertical, I'm still juggling with this vertical idea. I know there is emergence, and I know there is, at least superficially, a vertical emergence. But how to make sense of that in a model, I don't know. So I tend to think of human consciousness and human societies as, well, I like to think of it as more like a spiral, and I guess this comes to mind because spiral dynamics does this, but I think we need a more organic model than spiral dynamics that, even though spiral dynamics definitely recapitulates this idea of a cyclical nature of reality and is very complex and it has some very good roots, maybe a more organic, ecological version of that, or perhaps evolutionary version of that, that connects the evolution of human societies and those circles and memes and cycles with the more organic dimensions, just as we were mentioning with Gaia theory. Gaia theory is literally seeing human societies, higher societies, consciousness, sentient beings, and their organizational properties within the lower framework of a rainforest. And by reflecting the lower, as above, so below, it functions spontaneously and organically and has vitality again. It's reborn. So, in that sense, maybe we should try to tie in these natural, universal, cosmic, or evolutive properties, which are archetypal, mythopoetic, mythopoeic dimensions, to our evolutionary dimensions, because I think they kind of overlap and intertwine, if any of this makes sense. And I think spiral dynamics is a good starting point because it just takes our societies and looks at how they mimetically and culturally shift. Perhaps I wouldn't say it's linear, but it comes off that way sometimes. I don't know if that's just my own bias or not, but there is something to that horizontal rhizomatic cycle that we follow at higher. You could just call it a higher intensity, and that's why the spiral works, because it is following some kind of archetypal pattern. But you can differentiate the higher from the lower, because the higher is just simply more complex, and the lower is not complex in that way, in the form of sentience or consciousness. Because some people, here's one argument that I hear, and I would like to get your input on this. Some people in evolution, some scientists say, look, there's nothing particularly vertical about any of this. Human beings are just one branch on this tree of life. There's so much life out there, abundantly so, that has nothing to do with the evolution of consciousness. In fact, there's more life that doesn't do that. There's more life in the single-celled organisms and in the insects. And there's abundantly more of them than us. So they're so much more fascinating, and we can't really create a vertical model. I don't know if this is seeing the whole picture or not, but I guess this would be a whole other video. Kind of jumped around a little bit, but that's everything I was thinking of in a nutshell. Anyway, thanks again. Make a response video. Let me know what you think.